Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, as it's known.
Which day is that?
Wednesday. Chaf Ches Iyar, I believe, the 28th day of Iyar on the Jewish calendar. It's the day in 1967 where we took over Jerusalem. Took back Jerusalem. In 1948 we got the state of Israel, and in 1967 we finally took back Yerushalayim. So are there any halachic ramifications from the fact that Jerusalem was taken back under Jewish control? Or just, besides obviously a lot of practical ramifications, we could have a lot of yeshivas and other things and other good things happen from a pure halachic view. Did anything change? That was a major question in 1967, because as our Gemara tells us in Moed Katan, when dealing with the laws of Avelis, we know there are laws of mourning, and we have personal mourning periods when we lose our loved ones, and we have national mourning periods. Some perhaps are still in now during Sfiras HaOmer, some who follow their other minhagim are still in the midst of it, and we have during the 3 weeks. So there are different halachas of mourning. However, within the halachas of mourning, there's halacha of kriya, of ripping one's garment when they lose a parent, a loved one, etc. So the halachas of kriya. However, the Gemara tells us in Moed Katan, not only the halacha of kriya when you mourn the loss of a person, an individual, but this kriya as well when we mourn the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, we'll see that minhag is still around today. We'll get to when you go to the Kotel HaMaravi, whether you rip kriya or not. But the Mishnah, the Gemara in Moed Katan tells us, Haroa Ari Yehuda, you see the cities of Yehuda, which is a discussion whether that means Shevet Yehuda, Malchus, Beis Yehuda. We're not going to be spending much time on that, but that's what the Gemara says. You see Ari Yehuda b'charbano, you see Yerushalayim b'charbano, and you see the Beis HaMikdash b'charbano, in ruins and destruction. You have a chi of kriya. You have to. It's a time of mourning, and you rip your garment. So let's focus on Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash for now. So the question was, in 1967, when we took back under Jewish control Yerushalayim, does that make Yerushalayim not b'charbano anymore? And what's the definition of being in ruins? So that is a major discussion. What does it mean? So the two basic possibilities, you always have fine-tuning within each one, but why are we, pre-67, why would we rip kriya if a person went to Jerusalem and it was before Israel took over, and said, why would the halacha be the one to rip kriya? So one possibility is because Yerushalayim is the political capital of Israel, and Israel recognizes it, and most other people are coming around to it these days, but Yerushalayim is the political capital. And is that why when Yerushalayim is in ruins we rip kriya? Or no, it's nothing to do with political capital or Jewish people running the government there. Yerushalayim is an extension of the Makam HaMikdash. Yerushalayim is an extension of the Beis HaMikdash, and as long as the Beis HaMikdash is b'charbano, so then it's still considered b'charbano. So that's what they asked Rav Soloveitchik in 1967, because people were saying that you no longer have to rip kriya anymore because now it's in Jewish control. Regarding Yerushalayim, that's the way Ramosha seems to learn as well, Ramosha Feinstein and others, that once the Jews took over Yerushalayim, the Jews are living there and the Jewish government, so it's no longer b'charbano, therefore there's no longer a need to rip kriya. But Soloveitchik and others felt differently, and he felt that no, that it's a connected. Yerushalayim's kedusha stems from the Makam HaMikdash, and unfortunately, we still are in Yerushalayim is still considered b'charbano. In fact, some of his proofs is Because Yerushalayim, there's certain things you can only eat, let's say kachim kalam, there's certain sacrifices that only can be eaten within a certain part within Yerushalayim. Once you leave, he says, where is that? The Mishnah and Kalim talk about different Asara Kedushas. Even within Israel, Yerushalayim is known as the highest level of Kedusha, as we'll get to. So therefore, he says, we see how different halachas of Kachim Kalam apply with Yerushalayim, implying it's nothing to do with political capital, it has to do with the Makam HaKdusha. Or in fact, the Rav points out many times, it uses the word Lifnei Hashem. When we talk about Samachta Lifnei Hashem Elokechem, when we talk about being in the Beis HaMikdash, also in terms of Yerushalayim. Many times when instead of saying Yerushalayim, they use Lifnei Hashem. So the Rav says, based on the same terminology used, his opinion was, and I think Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach agreed in principle, maybe for a different reason as well, but he said it's still considered B'Chorbano, and therefore the Chiyuv Kriya remains even after the Jews, even after we took back Yerushalayim in 67. In fact, that's also part of the discussion about Ari Yehuda as well. What's so special about the cities of Yehuda that only Reb Kriya on them? So the different possibilities. Some also say because its proximity to Yerushalayim, or others say because Yehuda, Malchus based Yehuda, was the Malchus, and that had to do with the political capital as well. So the same discussion on a lower level of the Ari Yehuda have to do with Yerushalayim. So there is no consensus, since there is no consensus view on whether we rip on Yerushalayim. It's a machlokus among the poskim. However, the minhag seems to be, I haven't met anyone, not that it doesn't exist, I'm sure there might be some people, but the minhag I'm familiar with is not to rip when you see Yerushalayim today. And that could be also, as the poskim point out, since it's a major machlokus among the Gedolei HaPoskim post-67, so we have a general halacha kedivrei hamekel ba'avelis. We have a general rule. When it comes to laws of mourning, we always go with the lenient view. And therefore, since it's a machlokas, whether you do kriya or not, so we're lenient. Even though some point out that if you look at the Gemara carefully, kriya isn't included in the halacha l'divrei hamekel. In other words, when we talk about being lenient, usually by kriya isn't included. So they point out here, even if you assume that way, it's different here, because when they're talking about kriya, it's not included in the leniency. That's when you know you have an obligation to mourn, but there's only a technical issue, you know whether they should do kriya. So in that case, we're not necessarily mekel. But in this case, it's a whole shayla whether there's anything to mourn over. Here is over there there's definitely a chiyuv to mourn, and it's a technical issue of kriya, then we're not so lenient. But in this case, they point out, everyone would agree here, because the question of mourning at all is a question, is Yerushalayim considered b'chorbanu or not? And therefore, that's also, I think, one of the questions where on Tisha B'Av, that we say the Nachem, which talks about the destruction, but so the consensus is most, I don't know anyone who does, there could be a very small minority who do, but since it's a shaila, so the minhag is not to rip kriya on Yerushalayim. What about when you go see the Makam HaMikdash, you go to the Kotel HaMaravi, you see the Temple Mount, you see there's no Beis HaMikdash. So that, the consensus view is, that's why everyone agrees, then you do rip kriya. There's one shita which isn't really accepted, as you only have to do it once in your lifetime, but that's like a shita, a single opinion, yeah.
Have you seen or do you know people who do rip kriya?
You're looking at one.
Okay, so what did you do?
So basically what the custom is, again, within customs, most people is, you come with, when I was in yeshiva there, when we went to the kotel, so you used to go with you put a T-shirt on top of your shirt or whatever. You go to the kotel and and kind of like you rip the you rip the shirt.
T-shirt over for the next trip.
Yeah, exactly. That's a further question. Could you sew it up or use a different one? But some people might use the regular clothing. I remember the minhag when I was in yeshiva. That's what we used to do. But I know so then they're different. If you go on Yom Tov, they're different. some people try different ways to circumvent not having to do Kriya. This halacha is, strictly speaking, every 30 days. If you haven't been at the Kotel Amarabi for 30 days, you have to rip Kriya again. Mm-hmm. So at least the first time you go, then for sure you should do it. And then some try to go on, on Shabbos or on Yontiv, and it's a question whether that would count or not. Obviously, you're not going to rip Kriya on Shabbos or Yontiv, but that's a question whether it would actually you have to do it afterwards. But that's the strict halacha. Once you're ready, once you're there all the time, so there are other kulas we could find here or there. But strictly speaking, the halacha on the books is every 30 days. It's like, because 30 days is like a new time again, and therefore, in theory, every 30 days you have to rip Kriya on the Kotel. Why do we have to? It's obvious why we're ripping Kriya by the Beis HaMikdash. That's clearly by Ari Yehud and Yerushalayim. We can discuss if it's based on its political capital, etc. By the Beis HaMikdash, it's clear that we're ripping over Churban Habayis. And in fact, Rav Tukachinsky, who he wrote the book on Hilchos Avelis, the Gesher HaChayim. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's a Hebrew book. I think it might be translated in English now. I'm not sure. But it's the Gesher HaChayim. He wrote also on a book on Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael. So in his Sefer, he points out that really, strictly speaking, you have to actually see the ground of where the Beis HaMikdash was in order to rip Kriya. And most people, if you go to the Kotel, you're not going to be able to. So we quote, some have very few, but some have a minhag. I think Rav Sternbuch and others. Some people go up on the apartment buildings near the Kotel. They actually go down and see down the ground, and they rip Kriya from there. But with the minhag Yisrael is not to do that, or it's just to rely on seeing the Kotel. That's because when you see the dome and the rock up there, what greater churban? The Beis HaMikdash isn't up. And that signifies we're in, a time of a Chorbano, so they do that. Some say as well, because it's a machlokas whether you should rip Kriya on Yerushalayim today, whether it's considered b'Chorbano or not, so therefore the minhag is not to. So someone they rip Kriya by the Kotel, they have in mind that this goes on Yerushalayim. Perhaps you can say it has in mind on the Ari Yehuda as well. Again, in terms of the Ari Yehuda under Jewish control, so many say it's not an issue. The issue is, let's say, like Bethlehem today. There are different Ari Yehuda which are still not under Jewish control. And, it's a discussion what's considered Jewish control. It's enough that the Israel army drives through there once a day, once a week, or not. So that is a major. Rav Shachter's of the opinion that one should still rip Kriya today on Bethlehem. If you go into if it's Jewish control, so then he says that's the Ari Yehuda. He thought he quotes different achronim, that's the political capital, or as long as it's under Jewish control, you wouldn't have to do Kriya. But the places in Ari Yehuda, which are still under Palestinian control, he felt that you still should rip Kriya. Others disagreed and said it's illogical that without ripping Kriya on Yerushalayim, so how to be ripping Kriya on Bethlehem? So that's a major discussion even Bizman Hazeh, but that was a direct halachic issue. When we took back Yerushalayim in 1967, besides the great gift we got and all the benefits that we're still accruing today, but a major halakha question arose at that time regarding what's the definition of Yerushalayim b'Chorbano. It's obviously a good thing that it's under Jewish control, but whether it's still b'Chorbano, that depends on what b'Chorbano means. If Yerushalayim is an extension of the Makam HaMikdash, then we're clearly b'Chorbano. If Yerushalayim is the capital of Eretz Yisrael, so then we have it back that it would no longer be b'Chorbano. So since it's a major discussion among the current poskim, the minhag is not to do it because halacha kedibri hamekel ba'avelos. And some have in mind when they rip Kriya by the Kotel, they have in mind to go on Yerushalayim and why not throw in Ari Yehuda while you're at it. So regarding the Kedushas HaMikdash, the question is, now that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, which everyone is in agreement with, we don't have one now, what about the status of the Temple Mount? In other words, what about the Kedushas HaMakam? Does the Kedusha remain? There's a discussion regarding Eretz Yisrael as well, that when Ezra was Makadesh it, and then it had its Kedusha, when they left, we lost it. So that's a separate discussion about agricultural halachas. That's a different discussion by the Kedushas HaMikdash. In fact, the Rambam and the Bali Tosas make that distinction. That they say, Bizman Hazeh, we no longer have the Kedusha, the agricultural, in terms of the Rambam's opinion is Truma, Ma'isa, Shemitah, they're all D'Rabbanan today because we don't have Bias Kulchem. We don't have the majority of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. In fact, the Rambam writes, Bizman Ba'yisheni, when the second temple was standing, Truma was only D'Rabbanan because you didn't have, Ezra couldn't find anyone. You had to run back and try to drag everyone to go to Eretz Yisrael. We're getting closer today, but we're still not there yet with Bias Kulchem. However, regarding Kedushas HaMikdash, the Rambam writes, applies today. So the question is, why the distinction? When it comes to Kedushas, Eretz Yisrael, Mitzvahs Hatuliyas Fa'aretz, the Rambam writes, it no longer has the sanctity it used to have. But by Kedushas HaMikdash, the Makam HaMikdash, even though it's destroyed, the Rambam writes the Kedusha remains. That seems to be Tosas' opinion. Tosas has a whole long Tosas giving different sources why. But the Rambam gives a svara. The Rambam tells us, tries to give a logical reason. The Rambam writes, you know why? Why do we have Kedushas HaMikdash even today? Because you can knock down the walls. Aval hashchina eino bato. It's not the walls that give it the holiness, it's the divine presence that dwells there. And therefore, even though we don't have the walls, God, so to speak, is homeless now, but He's still living there. The divine presence is still there, and the Kedusha remains. And that's why that will be a major nafkamina, whether you could go on, if it has the Kedusha, whether you can walk on top of the Temple Mount, that we'll get to in a second. Yeah. But the Rambam's opinion is Kedusha remains forever because Hashchina Eino Bato. You can't get rid of the divine presence. And the Ravid disagrees with the Rambam. He says, Svaras Atzma, what are you talking about, Rambam? Where do you get this distinction between Kedushas HaMikdash and Kedusha? The Ravid says there is a distinction, but in the opposite direction. The Ravid says the agricultural laws, that applies even Bizman Hazeh, that remains forever. But Kedushas HaMikdash, that doesn't apply. Why? It's a different text in the Ravid. At one point, the one we have, it says, because V'nigla li, it was revealed to me. And if you knew the Ravid, he was a big makubal. He was very into Kabbalah. So he seems to be saying, I got a Ruach HaKodesh on this one, and I was from Shlomo HaMelech or whoever, that there's no longer Kedusha anymore in the Makam HaMikdash. But if you see other Gerses, it's probably not V'li Nira, it's the V'nigla Lo. In other words, he's talking about Ezra, not himself, that when Ezra built the second temple, he already had a Masorah from Shlomo HaMelech that he knew that there was going to be a third Beis HaMikdash. So when he built the second temple, it was only going to be temporary. So therefore, it was built into the kedusha of the second temple. Since it was going to be destroyed anyway, so he never endowed it with the full kedusha that will last forever. That's a major machlokas to Rambam and Ravid whether there's kedushas HaMikdash today or not. In other words, the major practice of could I go on the Temple Mount? They must have tours up there. Could I go on top where the temple was? There's certain spots on there where, in theory, everyone's in agreement. Number one is we're all Tamei Mace today. We come in contact with the dead. We don't have the Paraduma. So there's certain spots we can't go no matter what. But there's certain spots, and some do, if you go to the mikveh beforehand, they're very areas where, in theory, one could go. But in practice, the minig is not to go. The Meiri writes during his time, the minig was to follow the Ravid, and people used to walk on top. But that doesn't seem to be our minig. The Magen Avram, the Mishmar, all the poskim say today, we go like the Rambam, that there's Kedushas HaMikdash, and therefore one would not be permitted to go on top of the Temple Mount. And you go with the Ravid, I like that. And then they point out that that's why the Rambam's opinion is that there's halacha that you have to, when you bring karbanos, it has to be brought to the Beis HaMikdash. But and it's an issue to bring what they call a bama, bringing a karban in your backyard, so to speak. But that prohibition of bringing a bama only applies if you could bring a karban in the Beis HaMikdash. But if you can't bring a karban in the Beis HaMikdash, then you're allowed to bring a bama. The Rambam writes, Bisman Hazeh, it's also to bring a bama. It's also shchutei chush. You can't bring a karban outside the Beis HaMikdash. The question is, why not? It's destroyed. But we see the Rambam consistent with his view that the Kedusha remains. In fact, as we discussed in other times, that the Rambam's sheet is, in theory, one can bring a carbon today. There are only technical reasons stopping us, that we're Tamei Meis, we don't have the big day kahuna, because really you don't need a Beis HaMikdash to bring a carbon. That the Gemara, the Brisa tells us, Makrivim Afal Pi She'en Lo Bayis. As long as you know where the Makam HaMizbeach is, you could bring it. Of course, do we know where the Makam HaMizbeach is? Could you figure out from certain walls? That's a whole major discussion.
You don't have to put the Mizbeach there?
Yeah, so therefore it's a major discussion, so therefore we don't do it for many technical reasons, but according to the Rambam, the Kedusha remains, and therefore it's also, he quotes the Isser Kares of Shchutei Chutz. In theory, the Ravid would say it's okay, even though it's not so simple. He says it's okay. But so it's a major machlokas Rambam and Ravid what is Kedusha, but let me point out, you tell me the Ravid views the Makam HaMikdash as a nothing today? That can't be. So you mean there's no, so even though he disagrees with the Rambam, if you look at the Ravid closely, he never says it's permitted. He says, Hanichnas Ata, if you enter the Temple Mount today, you're not chayav kares. Somebody asked me, can I do this on Shabbos? I say, no, you're not chayav skila, but it's not okay. There's a big difference between not being chayav skila and being permitted. The Ravid just says, Hanichnas Ata, if you enter the Temple Mount now, you're not chayav kares. It's a far cry from saying, because in many other halachas of a Tamei walking up, the Ravid doesn't argue with the Rambam. So the Achronim point out, Rav Kook among others point out, but even the Ravid has to agree that there's something special about the Makam HaMikdash. So they point out there's two different types of Kedushas in the Beis HaMikdash. There's the Kedusha from David, that's what they call the Kedushas HaRitzpah, the actual ground. That's what some people are makbid to actually see the ground. They say to rip kriya, you have to actually see the ground of the Makam HaMikdash. And then there was Shlomo HaMelech who actually built it, the wall. So based on different psukim, they point out the Chiyuv Kares is only dependent on Shlomo, on Shlomo's Kedusha. And therefore, that there's no Beis HaMikdash today, so that's the Ravid's opinion, that there's no Chiyuv Kares. However, the Kedusha of David remains intact, and that's a Kedusha Darais, that's an inherent Kedusha. It's hard to say that Eretz Yisrael has an inherent Kedusha, even though technically speaking we might not keep Truma, Maisa, Shemitah, Min Torah because of Bias Kulcham, but we agree fundamentally, no matter, even without the mitzvahs of Tuyas Ba'aretz, even before year 15, Eretz Yisrael had an inherent Kedusha. So if you're going to say Eretz Yisrael has an inherent Kedusha, it's hard to say that Makam HaMikdash also doesn't have. So maybe for technical reasons, the Ravid says there's no Chiyuv Kares, but according to the Rambam, there is, and the Kedusha HaMikdash remains. And therefore there's still, one cannot go on the Temple Mount, one has an issue of bringing karbanas, and the Tami, all the different halachas of the Makam HaMikdash apply, and therefore everyone agrees the Kotel had to do, that the Makam HaMikdash is, we're b'chorbano today, and we have to rip kriya at the Kotel. I said it was a major question in 1967 when we took over Yerushalayim, whether you have to rip kriya on Yerushalayim. The Rav felt that Yerushalayim's Kedusha is based on extension of the Makam HaMikdash, and he felt Yerushalayim is still considered b'chorbano regarding kriya, even though the minig is not like the Rav. Most people don't rip kriya today on Yerushalayim, but the Rav felt that, not just the Rav, other Gedolim as well, felt that Yerushalayim's Kedusha is an extension of Kedushas HaMikdash, and hence, in theory, one would still have to rip kriya.
Yes, but you have to make a distinction where the Makam HaMikdash is and the Harabayim. Those have gone to those places now. You can believe they're not actually it's Harabayim is permitted.
Right, point that different, right. The different people go to the mikveh, different places.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I said the minig is both don't go, but technically speaking, there are places where aren't considered the Makam HaMikdash.
Yeah.